Late at night in Prince George's County, Maryland, there's a narrow stretch of road the locals call the Terror Road. It's shrouded by thick oak and maple trees, and deep within those woods, beyond the reach of any car's headlights, people say you can sometimes see a pair of glowing, blood-red eyes staring back from the darkness. For decades, residents have whispered about the same legend, a creature with the head of a goat and an axe in its hand, said to roam between the forest and an abandoned stretch of railroad. This axe-wielding monster is known by a name that sends chills down the spine: the Goatman. If you ask any old-timer in Maryland about the Goatman stories, almost all of them will mention one place: Lover's Lane. Back in the 1950s, it was a secluded spot where young couples often went to be alone. The narrow dirt road cut through the woods, far from the city lights, silent except for the sound of insects and the whisper of the wind. They say the very first Goatman encounter happened there. It was an autumn night in 1957, the air damp and cold after a light rain. A young couple drove their old Ford deep into the forest. Earlier that evening, they had been at a drive-in theater watching a romance film. When they turned onto the wooded back road, the world around them fell completely silent. The boy parked the car in a small clearing surrounded by trees, where only a few faint stars peeked through the canopy above. In the stillness, with no one around to disturb them, the young couple began to kiss inside the car. Just as things were heating up, a strange metallic scraping sound came from outside. It was sharp and heavy, like rusted metal being dragged slowly across rough ground. The sound had a steady, deliberate rhythm that cut straight through the quiet night, slipping through the cracks of the car door and into their ears. The boy, irritated by the interruption, thought someone nearby had seen their parked car and was trying to play a prank. He smiled reassuringly, gave the girl's hand a gentle pat, and told her not to worry. Then he grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment, pushed open the car door, and stepped out into the darkness. The girl stayed inside, watching through the window as the boy's figure slowly disappeared into the shadows of the forest. His flashlight beam flickered between the trees, briefly lighting up the rough bark of the trunks. At first, she could still hear his footsteps and a few muttered words as he looked around. But soon the footsteps stopped. The flashlight beam froze on a patch of bushes ahead, then suddenly jerked and went out completely. At that exact moment, in the last flicker of light, the girl saw a huge shadow standing behind him, its head crowned with curved horns. Her heart seized in terror. She called out the boy's name again and again, but the only response was a suffocating silence. Panicking, she reached for the door handle, thinking of running out to find him, but fear had taken over her body. Her legs felt as heavy as lead. All she could do was stare into the pitch-black forest outside, waiting, trembling, unable to move. Just as the girl was trembling in fear, a strange sound of footsteps echoed from deep within the forest. It didn't sound like the soft thud of human feet. It was heavier, more deliberate, as if something hard was striking the ground. The sound came slowly but carried an oppressive weight, growing closer and closer to the car. The girl held her breath, afraid to make even the slightest noise. Through the fogged-up car window, she stared in terror toward the direction of the sound. Moments later, under the faint shimmer of starlight, a tall silhouette began to emerge. It stood half a head taller than an average man, its body upright like a human's. But when it drew closer, the girl could clearly see that its head was shaped like a goat's. Two curved horns caught the dim light, reflecting a cold metallic gleam. The creature's entire body was covered in coarse gray fur, its long arms hanging down near its knees, and its feet, those were unmistakably cloven hooves. Each step it took left a deep print in the soft soil. The sight made the girl's pupils constrict sharply. She was completely paralyzed with fear. When the Goatman reached the car, it didn't attack immediately. Instead, it began to circle slowly around the vehicle. Every so often, it would lean its face close to the window, and through the misted glass, the girl could make out the fine hair on its snout and those blood-red eyes with rectangular pupils, staring straight into the car, straight at her. A foul odor, a mix of animal musk and rotting leaves, seeped in through the cracks in the window, making her stomach twist. She clamped a hand over her mouth to stop herself from vomiting. At one point, the Goatman tried prying at the car window with its fingers. The sharp tapping of nails against glass pierced through the still night, Terrified, the girl screamed and trembled uncontrollably, but that didn't stop the creature's attempt to get inside. Eventually, she buried her face in her knees, too afraid to look anymore, silently praying that the monster would just go away. Yet the Goatman seemed in no hurry to leave. It kept pacing around the car, occasionally scraping one of its horns against the window with a grating screech, as though the glass could shatter at any moment. Time dragged on endlessly. Every second felt like a century. The girl's legs went numb from tension, but she didn't dare move. After what felt like forever, the first faint light of dawn appeared, accompanied by the distant chirping of morning birds. A passing forest ranger eventually spotted the car parked in the clearing, and inside, in the driver's seat, the girl sat curled up, her eyes vacant and unfocused. Seeing the scene, the ranger immediately called the police. The police arrived quickly and began a thorough investigation around the vehicle. In the soft forest soil, they found numerous footprints, some clearly belonging to the missing boy from that night. The officers followed the boy's tracks about 50 meters deeper into the woods before they abruptly vanished, as if he had been lifted straight into the air. All that remained on the ground was a broken flashlight. There were no signs of struggle, no trace of the boy, nothing. The only unusual finding was an axe hanging from a nearby tree, its blade stained with dark red blood. The wooden handle was worn, and on the metal edge were not only bloodstains, but also a few tiny strands of hair. But in 1957, forensic science was still primitive. There was no DNA testing to determine whose blood or hair it was, and no fingerprint database to identify who had held the weapon. The axe became the only piece of evidence in the case, yet it pointed to no one and revealed nothing of the truth. The only witness in this case, the girl, remained in a dazed, almost detached state during her questioning. Her recollection of that night came out in fragments. She told investigators that while sitting in the car, she saw a tall figure emerge from the woods. The figure had a human body but the head of a goat. She thought it might have been holding something in its hand, but she was too terrified to look twice. Her bizarre description turned an already puzzling case into something even more mysterious. Though the police were skeptical, they couldn't find any logical explanation for what she had seen. In the end, the case was filed away as an unsolved mystery in the Maryland Police Archives. But over time, the legend of the Goatman began to spread. In the decades that followed, countless locals claimed to have seen a strange, goat-like creature lurking near Lover's Lane. Forest rangers reported spotting a tall shadow moving between the trees late at night, its outline eerily resembling a goat holding an axe. Drivers said they'd heard footsteps following their cars as they passed down the old road, and when they glanced in their rearview mirrors, they swore they saw two glowing red eyes staring back from the darkness. From a scientific perspective, there might be rational explanations for these stories. The forests around Lover's Lane are home to plenty of white-tailed deer and coyotes. In the dim light of night, people can easily mistake these animals for something more sinister. And when fear takes over, the brain tends to distort what the eyes see, turning ordinary shadows into terrifying shapes. As for the blood-stained axe found at the scene, it could have simply been a hunter's tool left behind, coincidentally discovered after the boy's disappearance, which gave it an eerie significance. Still, not everyone was convinced by these explanations. For those who claimed to have seen the Goatman with their own eyes, the creature was real, undeniably real. They insisted it wasn't a wild animal mistaken for something else, nor a hallucination born from fear. As debates continued, one researcher brought up an old incident known as the Beltsville Experimental Station case, an event that tied the Goatman legend to the shadowy world of genetic engineering. On the outskirts of Beltsville, Maryland, lies a seemingly ordinary stretch of forest. Dense oak and maple trees stretch as far as the eye can see. But few know that hidden deep within those woods is a facility established back in the 1950s, the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center, once one of the U.S. government's most secretive biological research sites. Official records claim its work focused on livestock breeding and animal disease control. But those who worked there knew the truth. What went on inside went far beyond anything the public was ever told. In the early 1950s, at the height of the Cold War between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, a fierce race in genetic engineering was underway. Nations around the world were pushing the limits of science, and the researchers at the Beltsville Center were no exception. They began experimenting with using viruses as carriers to combine the genes of different animals, hoping to alter hereditary traits. One particular research project, coded AGX13, was led by a biologist named Dr. William Rutherford. A graduate of MIT, Rutherford had previously worked on early radiation-induced mutation experiments and was considered a pioneer in animal gene recombination. Inside the Beltsville facility, Rutherford's lab was located in one of the most remote buildings, Warehouse B13. The windows there were always sealed shut, and the exterior walls were marked with biohazard and quarantine warnings. Within its concrete walls were hundreds of test subjects: goats, pigs, monkeys, and various small mammals. Rumor had it that Rutherford was conducting a highly controversial experiment, using viruses to transfer muscle endurance genes from animals into human cells. Officially, the research was said to be aimed at improving the physical resilience of agricultural workers, but many suspected it was actually a military genetic program in disguise. Then in the spring of 1951, Building B13 was suddenly sealed off. The official explanation was a viral containment breach, though no further details were released. Internal reports later revealed that one of the mutant viruses used in the experiments had produced disturbing results. It caused the host to rapidly grow coarse, thick hair, experience skeletal restructuring, and in some cases, develop hoof-like deformities. Days later, Dr. Rutherford himself began showing symptoms: a high fever and visible vascular swelling under the skin. By protocol, he should have been quarantined immediately, but he refused to leave the lab, insisting the fever was merely a temporary immune reaction. Over the next few nights, staff in B13 began reporting strange occurrences. They claimed to hear metallic dragging sounds echoing through the hallways after midnight. Some saw distorted images on the security monitors, an abnormally tall figure moving near the storage doors, its body hunched and its head strangely shaped. The test animals, too, became restless, agitated, and aggressive. A few of the goats reportedly died overnight, under unexplained circumstances. Before anyone could figure out what was happening, the building's power supply was cut off, and all security footage was mysteriously destroyed. When the rescue team finally arrived, B13 was in ruins. The walls were shredded, glass littered the floor, and the air reeked of blood mixed with disinfectants. Dr. Rutherford was nowhere to be found. Only his discarded hazmat suit remained, its inner lining covered in coarse, grayish hair. One surviving staff member, trembling and pale, later told investigators that he had seen it with his own eyes. Rutherford's body had mutated. He claimed the man had grown fur, hooves, and the head of a goat. According to him, Rutherford had gone mad, smashing through the lab doors before vanishing into the surrounding forest. Though his testimony sounded unbelievable, the rescue team indeed found no trace of Rutherford's body. The official accident report was cold and minimal. Project AGX13 terminated due to procedural failure, resulting in loss of biological control. Personnel missing, contamination severe, site to remain permanently sealed. From that point on, Building B13 was fenced off, and the surrounding forest was officially declared a restricted zone. Shortly after the incident, the first person who claimed to have seen the Goatman in the experimental area was Joseph Mason, a janitor who worked at the research station. On June 14, 1951, Mason frantically reported to the station's security department that while cleaning an abandoned lab in the early morning, he saw a creature covered in hair, with horns on its head, crawl out of a ventilation duct. The thing moved incredibly fast, knocked over his cleaning cart, and left behind a trail of footprints smeared with green liquid before vanishing without a trace. Security officers immediately launched a search after receiving his report, but after hours of searching, they announced that nothing unusual had been found. Instead, they fired Mason for spreading rumors and causing panic. But Mason didn't stay silent. After being dismissed, he went straight to the local paper, the Maryland News Weekly, and told his story to a journalist. He even brought a photo he had secretly taken. Though it was blurry, you could faintly make out a gray humanoid figure with two horns standing in the shadows of the lab. Despite the unclear image, The Maryland News Weekly ran a story hinting that the government was conducting human-animal hybrid genetic experiments at the Beltsville Research Station. The article even quoted an anonymous source who claimed that the project's lead scientist had shown signs of physiological mutation before disappearing. However, just a few days after publication, the article was pulled from circulation. The accompanying photo and internal documents were confiscated. Later, the reporter claimed he had been warned to stop investigating the lab accident, or his life would be in danger. At the time, some people doubted the story that Rutherford had mutated after being infected. There was one major hole in that theory. The Beltsville Research Station was primarily devoted to agricultural studies. There had never been any public record or official confirmation of human genetic research there. No former employees had ever verified such experiments either. That skepticism persisted until 2010. That year, the U.S. Department of Agriculture declassified a batch of documents from the 1950s. Among them were files confirming that between 1950 and 1962, the Beltsville Research Station had indeed conducted goat gene editing experiments. The stated goal was to develop disease-resistant breeds. All records indicated that no abnormal specimens had ever appeared, but rather than silencing the rumors, those files only fueled them further, convincing even more people that the government was covering up the truth. In addition to eyewitness accounts and alleged attacks, there were also pieces of indirect evidence thought to be connected to the Goatman. In 2003, a hiker discovered a large nest made of branches and vines in the woods near Beltsville. The nest was about 2 meters wide, lined with hay and feathers, surrounded by chewed fruit and animal bones. Nearby was a stone carved with strange symbols that didn't resemble any known language. Local archaeologists examined it and said the markings were neither Native American totems nor modern graffiti, possibly an attempt by someone to imitate ancient symbols. It's easy to see why most of the so-called evidence for the Goatman remains controversial. Footprints can be faked, wounds could come from wild animals, photos can be doctored, and symbols might just be pranks. But what's strange is that nearly all these incidents occurred in the same area. Maryland's Prince George's County, the city of Beltsville, and around the Rockville Reservoir, the very heart of the Goatman legend. And the creature described in these cases was always nearly identical. Around 2 meters tall, covered in hair, with horns, a part human, part goat face, hoof-like feet, active mostly at night, and often spotted near forests or water reservoirs. That consistency has led many to believe these sightings aren't just coincidences, but evidence that something unknown may truly be living on that land.